Hi there everyone, Stevie Johnson here, and today I will be discussing the Eighth Amendment. First, I would like to say that Jesus Christ is central in human history. The three sources I use today come from William Barry III, and his article is called The Mandate of Miller. The second is Paul Baumann, Waiting on Death, and the third is Alex Reinert, Solitary Troubles. The Eighth Amendment states that excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment. The importance comes from the fact that it prevents the government from holding us for long periods of time in jail by simply imposing large bail. And if it was not for this, the government could keep a person in prison for as long as they chose to. However, the most controversial part of this amendment, which I will be focusing on, is that it is meant to safeguard Americans against excessive punishment. The debate over what is cruel and unusual punishment has been long-standing and long debated. The questions usually stem from how to properly interpret this amendment, and especially the phrase of cruel and unusual. How is a punishment's cruelty supposed to be measured, and what deems it unusual? Most of the controversy deals with the death penalty and whether it is considered cruel and unusual, or if it is seen as justice served. Barry mentions the court in 2010 held on Graham versus Florida that juveniles could not be sentenced to life imprisonment for non-homicidal offenses. This led Barry to bring up the case of Miller versus Alabama, which was brought to court 2 years later. This ruled that mandatory sentences for life without parole for juvenile offenders, even in cases of murder, was considered cruel and unusual punishment in violation of the Eighth Amendment. With these cases, Barry brings up the question if life without parole or death in the custody of state, as he puts it, is much too severe in its finality. So he really does not agree that, or he agrees that this is cruel and unusual punishment, that a person should not die at the hand of the state or have life sentences in that case. Baumann brings up the case of Glossip versus Gross in 2015, where the court held 5-4 that lethal injection using midazolam to kill death row inmates was not cruel and unusual punishment. The Supreme Court has decided in recent history this verdict. However, Baumann agrees through the case of Nathan Dunlap that the process of death row for convicted prisoners in itself is cruel and unusual. Dunlap was on death row for 18 years. When the vote for the governor of Colorado was set to take place. In this case, the Democratic candidate for Colorado, if he were to win, Dunlap would go free, and if the Republican candidate were to win the governor of Colorado, he would be sentenced to death. Dunlap's life depended on a political vote, which to Baumann was cruel. Not only that, but in general, he argues that because the death penalty is administered so arbitrarily and has delays with many, many years of waiting for the actual day of execution, this violates the Eighth Amendment and the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. It is clear to see why there are so many issues with the idea of the death penalty and whether it is humane, ethical, and cruel. There is no doubt the system is lengthy and somewhat flawed. However, many argue for it by the severity of the crime committed and the idea of kill and be killed. One issue dealing with cruel and unusual punishment that I have never considered is the use of solitary confinement or extreme isolation that is so often used in the U.S. prison systems. Reinart argues that severity of this and believes it to be a cruel punishment violating the Eighth Amendment. He argues that it has a significant impact on one's mental health, with health professionals considering it dehumanizing, resulting in deep emotional disturbances, self-harm, and social death. To Reinart infringes on basic human rights, and isolation deteriorates a person from the inside. In closing, the Eighth Amendment is meant to prohibit cruel and unusual punishment. The problem is that we cannot come to a consensus as a society as to what is cruel and unusual. The truth is, we may never come to that agreement on what the interpretation of this amendment is supposed to be from when it was first written. Thanks.